Finally, we come to the last album that I'm going to be reviewing in preparation for Neal Morse's latest album of The Similitude of a Dream. This one was voted by you guys, and it was pretty neck and neck with another album of his, but as you can see, this one won out in the end. So let's dive in and find out why so many people love this album. Sola Scriptura by Neal Morse. Sola Scriptura is Neal Morse's, I guess, fifth or sixth, or I don't know exactly how many albums you want to include in his discography, but it's either like his fifth or his 11th album. When he went solo back in 2001 after leaving Spock's Beard, he just kept pumping out the music. This guy didn't really want to sit still. I need to be honest, I never actually listened to this album until you guys had voted for it. The only albums that I had heard from Neal Morse coming up into this album, at least solo-wise, was Momentum, The Grand Experiment, and some of my concerns that I had about Neal Morse's albums definitely kind of arise on this album because at the end of the day, this one is the quintessential Neal Morse album, I believe, in both the greatness and in kind of what he had reused time and time again. I felt like that was definitely the biggest drawback to albums such as The Grand Experiment, as well as Momentum. Now, this was also one of the most successful realizations of the music that I feel like he's had to date. Like most of his albums, this guy is a concept album, and this one was, the reformation of Martin Luther within the Christianity movement. With that setting within the music, I feel like, unlike a lot of other ones when the concept was a little bit more abstract, such as One and the question mark, this one was much more concrete and much more realized within that story, because he wasn't necessarily making it up as he went along, and it was a story that we all knew. So within that respect, it was a little bit easier to ease into the music, but just because it was easier to get into the music doesn't necessarily mean that the music here isn't that complex and isn't that just over-the-top, grandiose style that Neal Morse has kind of been known for. Within this album, as opposed to many other albums, I feel like this isn't a hindrance within the music. I feel like it was elevating the music that much more. Within this music, we do find a lot of those staples within a Neal Morse album. We have the fast playing and the complex time signatures and themes that get revisited time and time again. Long sweeping suites. I mean, the album really only is 4 tracks, and it starts off with a 28-minute suite of, I guess within the actual music or lyrics, that realization that Martin Luther had of, there's something wrong within Catholicism at this time, and I need to reform it. I need to kind of take a step back because God or Jesus or something is telling me that something's not quite right. We've bastardized the belief system up to this point, and something needs to change. And so that was kind of that realization, and he uses that image of the door. And that's another thing within this album that really I really enjoy, which is the images and the themes and the concepts within the lyrics. I mean, the door being the thing that Martin had used to use that protest, to bang on his critiques of where religion had been up until that point. And so that doorway of not only barring people from really doing what they believe, but also being able to open forth and you could step through to that next level. You have the image of like the dragon and the virgin's been defiled. And overall, the music is quite, I guess, stellar. Like, I thoroughly sunk into it, even though at this point these were the sounds that had been reused a lot within his other projects. But this felt like this was more of the source. This was where a lot of those themes and concepts kind of originated with. Now, I still haven't listened to One or Question Mark or any of those other ones, so I'm not quite sure if they were as intensive there. Now, I'm wondering, while I'm listening to a lot of these themes within the music, if he could have done a little bit more with them, tried them in different lights, because when he revisits these themes time and time again, it doesn't really change all that much. It might be a little bit slower, it might be a little bit faster, it might be in a major chord, or it might be in a different key, but at the end of the day, it's still the same root, it's still the same structure within that soundscape. And I wonder if he had played around with it a little bit more. Now we're kind of tinkering with what is already a masterfully crafted piece of music. I'm not going to get too much within the different suites found within this album, because for me, like a lot of great concept albums, this is just one piece of music that has been divided into different tracks. Maybe not quite to the extent of, say, like The Whirlwind. This one, it feels like it's different chapters of the same novel. Now, the first time I heard this, I had actually heard The Conflict played in full within one of his live albums. I believe it was the Momentum Live. And I really enjoyed this. There's one part on this where they're talking about the hypocrisy within the religion at that time, where he was saying, you know, I might have mistresses, but at least I'm a hetero. I liked Neal Morse's stance on this, to say, you know, even I recognize that there's hypocrisy within religion, and I understand that things need to shift and change within the current understanding of where we are as humans. So I like that flexibility. Overall, even though we were dealing very heavily with a religious theme within Martin Luther and his Reformation, I still feel like the overabundance of religious symbols being so far frontal was a little bit of a drawback for me. There's one part within the conclusion where he was saying, you know, when Jesus died on the cross, I died with him. That was a little cheesy, like a little too cheesy for me, because you're coming to understand what Jesus sacrificed on the cross. You don't really... That's something that Jesus took on. That wasn't something that we took on. I mean, he took it on because we screwed up. If you read into the Catholic and the Christianity and to understand, you know, the Jesus story. Being that lyric was what ushered us into kind of that final reprise of the music, it took me out a little bit, and that might be a lot of what's going on within this album. It is a lot, and a lot of the times it just go over the top. It is over ambitious. I feel like because it was one individual driving the entire force, I don't know how much other artists that were featured on this album really had too much say about it. Speaking of which, the other artists that do appear on this, we have the typical Mike Portnoy bringing up the drums, and his performance, of course, is just stellar. He brings his A game, as he does with most materials. And we also have Randy George having the bass on there. These three are really the core of what Neal Morse had been presented at this time. So overall, I really enjoyed this album to a point where I was just losing myself within the music, and I feel like that is the main point. You're losing yourself in the story, the themes, and the main music. And the music, whether or not you agree with the story, whether or not you love the images or words within it, you're going to love the music. And I highly recommend checking this out if you haven't already, if you are into that retro prog. If you don't like the retro prog, and you like pushing of boundaries within a musical climate, this one might not be quite for you. But if you do love just an expression of music, if you love that essence of prog, then you're going to really dig this album. I have to say, you should pick this up if you can. Find it in a physical format. Definitely listen to it, because it is a great time. And that's about it. That's all I've got to say about Sola Scriptura by Neal Morse. I have a feeling you guys have more to say about it than I do, so let me know what your thoughts are about this album down below. And thus concludes the lead up to Similitude of a Dream, coming out this Friday. I hope to get that review up as soon as I can. I want to dive into it and really engross myself in this. This isn't one that I want to just sit down, listen to a couple of times, and give you my first impression. This is one that I really want to get to know. So if it's not out within the next couple of weeks, I apologize, but I just want to get it right. And I'll be looking for a new series to cover within a lead up, and I have found the next artist that I'm going to cover. So I'm not going to tell you yet, I'm going to leave it as a surprise, but hopefully I'll get the first album review of that by the end of this month, and I'll hope to do one album per month leading up to the next release. And so thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are definitely the best, and thank you so much for supporting this. This was a lot of fun reviewing albums that you guys had suggested, so thank you guys so much for that. And until next time, notes out.